Acting Mayor, you're at 7 o'clock.
Are we ready? Okay. Okay. You finished your hiccups?
I'm done.
Okay. Hi, welcome everyone to our workshop of April 25th. I'm filling in for the mayor this evening, who I believe is online. And well, first we'll do a roll call. We've got Molly, Justice, myself, Paloma, Ren, Dan, Chris White, our city administrator, and Nick Ward-Willis is on the line, our city attorney. And just a notice of meeting location, this is also being done remotely, so people are viewing from home, as well as the mayor participating from a place unknown to us all, but he's not here.
Undisclosed.
Yeah. So the first item on the agenda this evening is a presentation on the Main Street Access Committee Advisory Report. I believe Stowe will be first. Stowe Boyd, the chairman of the committee, will speak.
Hello, I'm not going to take much time. I'm going to leave it all to John tonight. But I wanted to thank all the committee members for their hard work and ongoing work. We're still in the process of a number of things, like a business owner survey that we had intentionally deferred till after the paving of Main Street. So it'll start soon. In particular, along with all the members, I wanted to call out the hard work of Andy Bell and why am I drawing a blank? Pam Weatherby, thank you. My vice chairs. And of course, without John, this graphic realization of the recommendations we've been making over the last 2 years would not have come together. And instead, you would be reading a stack of memos, which isn't very much fun at all. With that, I'll hand it off to John, and thank you.
Thanks, Stowe.
Hello. I've been working with the Main Street Advisory Committee for 2 years, over 2 years now. Set up by the council just as the pandemic hit. So we've done all our meetings over virtually. But it's been a very good group. We had some people fall off and some people come on, but it's been a very diverse and opinionated and lively discussion about every issue that we were looking at. Over the 2 years, the committee has, by consensus, come up with, I think, 8 or 9 memos to the council.
It's more like 14.
Oh, who's counting? And we've done, I think, at least 1, maybe 2 presentations to the council, but not since last year. So we thought we'd consolidate everything together into one advisory report so that it could be illustrated, it would be consolidated, it would be comprehensive, it would be everything that we've done as a group up until now. So this is the cover. It's designed to show access over the century here, starting with horse-drawn to trolleys to the takeover of cars and then the dominance of cars on Main Street. So why aren't we advancing? I'm working with somebody else's computer here, so.
It might just because of the size of the file, because it's not going there now. Yeah, and that's see if it advances. So to advance is usually this.
For those watching on YouTube and Zoom, we are having some technical difficulties. Your computer is not frozen.
Back to the PDF.
There, is that the second page?
Now it's the third.
Okay. There you go. It's just slow and use those 2 arrows.
All right. That's not how I do it on my computer, but.
You dropped your computer.
All right. So I urge everybody to read the entire report. It's only 20 pages long. It's mostly illustrations. So it's a quick read. I'm going to show you the highlights tonight, mostly graphics, but try to lay out the basic ideas and concentrate on the recommendations that are in the report. The committee is advisory, so these are all suggestions, and we understand that it hasn't been gone through a public discussion or public comments, so look at this as a preliminary draft. In the 2017 comprehensive plan, there were suggestions for 3 next steps, and one of them was an urban design plan for Main Street, and we see this as the beginning of a fulfillment of that commitment. The report starts off with a brief history of Main Street. I won't go over that in detail. The main point that I think is important to make is, as most people probably know, Beacon grew out of 2 villages, Fishkill Landing and Matawan, which were a little over a mile apart. And so in the 1850s, as far as I can tell, they established a direct Main Street between the 2 villages. Before that, it was sort of a circuitous route more towards Verplank Avenue. And so Main Street was slow to fill in that central section. And well, you have to look at that as sort of the initial Main Street problem was the fact that it was a mile long, or a little over a mile long, and then a half mile down to the train station. So most people won't walk a mile on Main Street. They'll walk a quarter mile, maybe a half mile before they want to turn around or get into a car. So you have this long linear Main Street, 1 parcel deep and over a mile long, that makes it difficult to walk. Most Main Streets are more compact, more multi-street. They form block systems rather than 1 long linear strip. So with that in mind, now it's working good. The first chapter, or the second chapter actually, and the first priority is walkability. We looked at the major means of access for Main Street and wanted to prioritize pedestrians as the first step. So everything is gauged in how it works to help pedestrians access Main Street. And Main Street has very good sidewalks for the most part, but there are 4 problems that we've identified. One is the width is too narrow in many sections. Ideally, you want an 8-foot minimum width for the pedestrian clearway between the street tree and the storefront. In many places on Main Street, it's down to 3 or 4 feet. So 2 people can't pass, a couple can't walk together. 8 feet is really what you need for people to pass without rubbing shoulders. The clearway is often obstructed by portable signs, tables, and displays. Mostly signs is the main problem. People want to put them right in the middle of the sidewalk and to act as a hurdle that you can't get around without noticing their sign. So that is a real problem. There are too many gaps in the streetscape, auto-oriented frontage, places where there's nothing active, like the photo on the top left where you can't see into the storefront. There's nothing worth looking at there, so you have this very long gap where there's no interesting thing to look at on Main Street. And then finally, parking lots face Main Street in a few areas, and those should be replaced or put behind buildings or parks or some other, to get them off Main Street itself. So here are the key walkability recommendations. I'm going to jump right to the walkability recommendations. Restripe crosswalks at all intersections. I think the city's in the process of doing that. We recommended bold bar stripes in sort of Abbey Road crosswalks.
And that's
rather
what
than the ladders or.
We'll have the Abbey Road crosswalks.
Okay, good.
Yes, and they're dedicated to you.
We want to enforce the sidewalk clearway, 8 feet or as much as conditions allow. That means making sure that any portable signs or displays or tables are over towards the curb rather than right in the middle of the throughway of the sidewalk. For the main intersection, certainly a Teller and maybe a Chestnut, we recommended lead pedestrian intervals where you give the pedestrians a head start so they can get 2/3 or 3/4 of the way across the intersection. intersection before people turn left. We recommend committing to a re-energized tree planting program with a targeted tree cover. So there's a percentage citywide of how much tree cover you have so that you don't exacerbate the heat island effect of cities, which is getting worse. And an elevated annual budget, a commitment to street trees where there aren't ones. And there's a lot of places where there's empty tree wells or bare parking lots. Public bathrooms was a big discussion. We've recommended that at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 public bathrooms be opened up at existing buildings, like the Memorial Building or the Visitor Center, which have existing bathrooms but aren't open to the public when people really need public bathrooms. And then the final one is illustrated to the bottom left. There's a place at the end of Main Street, on the northeast end of Main Street near the falls, that is owned by MTA and the Roundhouse, sort of 50-50. And it's right next to where it's going to be a future rail trail. And we recommended that you work with the owners to make that into a public park. It has great mountain views, it has overlooking the falls and the creek. And because it's in the floodway, the federal floodway, so it can't be developed for anything too much that wouldn't be washed away in a flood. We think it's a perfect place for a public park.
John, if we have questions, would you prefer we ask after each chapter or at the end?
I think that's probably the most efficient, but I don't know.
After each chapter?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question about the park at the Roundhouse. It was my understanding that when the Roundhouse was built and the whatever arrangements were made at that time, that there was supposed to be some kind of viewing platform on the Main Street side facing the falls, like there is on the other side. A few people have mentioned this to me now, that the city was supposed to get a platform on the Main Street side, but it was never constructed. Do you know of that, or whether that's true?
I've never heard that. I wasn't here
I can,
when they're not.
John, I can weigh in on that. So
Okay.
that is correct. It was part of the approved site plan. However, the MTA would not grant an easement or permission for the deck to be built onto their property, which would have been required, as well as access over the railway.
Mm-hmm. I see. So that problem is gone for us now, or gone for us soon?
Potentially, yeah, it depends. I don't know how the ownership of the property will be, or if the MTA would allow that easement.
There is a city
that would
right-of-way at the end of Herbert Street I assume that allows the city to access over that tracks.
Right, but where Dan is referring to or where it's been referred to as the section by the falls, that would have been a viewing platform. It was part of the original approval for the Roundhouse project.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Part of the pedestrian chapter is additional pedestrian amenities or features that make pedestrian life pleasant. One of them are light fixtures. You really want to extend the day and bring people out in the evening. And the city has some good lighting and some not so good lighting along Main Street. There's essentially 4 types of lighting in different segments. So on the western end, you have very low lighting, 11 feet high, about 30 to 40 feet apart. They're pedestrian scale. They're historic. They fit with the historic district. But then you go to the opposite, 40-foot high Cobra lights in the center section of Main Street, which broadcast light into upper story windows and give a real sort of, not a very traditional feeling for Main Street. It feels like more of a high security zone rather than a pedestrian-oriented place. And it goes down the line. You have some really nice ones on the west end, and then it goes back to, on the far end towards East Main Street, you have lights that are actually hung on telephone poles. And you can see from the photos, the tall ones give a lot more glare, and they light up the upstairs windows. So the idea would be, the recommendation is to bring all the lights down to pedestrian scale. Somewhere between 12 and 14 feet is generally recommended. Mm-hmm. One strategy that you might do to help pay for it, because lighting is expensive, is to take every other light off the west end where we think there's actually too much light and move it to the center section and start taking down some of the taller lights. So you can actually save on the cost of the fixtures. Because if you look at the lighting on the west end, it really is, I think, overlit. And you could probably take away every other light. I would probably try to do an experiment first, take one out and see what you think. But you don't want to be overlit either. You want sort of a pool of light as you go down the street so that people aren't, feeling a glare about the sidewalks.
And John, just a quick question on that. Some of the historic lights also have a glare because they're not full cutoff. Would your recommendation be
Yes.
to move to full cutoff lights?
Yes.
So those are lights that don't allow light to protrude horizontally. They just go down.
I think
and
all
they're
the
dark
historic fixtures.
dark sky compliant.
I think all the historic fixtures
Are they?
full cutoff.
Okay.
There's a couple extra ones that were put in at the far northern end of Main Street, over by Melzinga, that are really bright
Okay.
and don't have any shielding on them. But most of the traditional lights are, I believe, are full cutoff, certainly the ones on the western end. We also looked at troublesome intersections and how to make them more pedestrian friendly. The worst, I think, of the batch is East Main Street. It's wide open, only one leg has a crosswalk. It's confusing with the dummy light. People don't know which way to go on which side of the dummy light. The tracks are still there, so there's a trip hazard. It's very long cross at East Main Street, which shouldn't happen. We did a conceptual design of what it should look like. Extended curbs to shorten the crosswalks, bar crosswalks, a dotted line through the intersection to make sure people understood which side of the dummy light. And we recommend three-way stop there, so that everybody comes to a stop at the crosswalk, looks at each way before proceeding, rather than one side cruise and the other side pile up and waiting to turn left. And under this configuration, you also have room for a significant number of street trees in the area. That is real barren now.
In this drawing, John, at the end of both ends of the crosswalk, there's a little green dot in the sidewalk. What does that represent? Is that a crosswalk sign?
It's that north-south pedestrian leg is the future rail trail. And so people didn't ride their bikes and all of a sudden end up on East Main Street. You would put something in the middle as a deflector so that people would either slow down or stop when they got to the East Main Street intersection. So that's just a little planted island that might have a stop for the, for traffic or some other, get people off their bikes before they make that crossing.
I remember in the prior meeting when you presented, there was discussion about parking right around that curve there. There was talk of taking out a couple of those parking spots because as you come around that curve, and maybe this solves it because it slows things down a little bit at that intersection.
Yeah.
So then as people come around the curve.
Yeah, what I have there is instead of 2 lanes coming out on East Main Street, I have it down to 1. Mm-hmm. And then a curb extension that shields that parking space so that it directs people out around it so that people don't clip that last parking space. And you actually get 1 more parking space, but it's a protected space by the extended curb. Fountain Square is another interesting intersection with a long history. That used to be a fountain out there. And it is a really nice urban place that has been lost to parking. There's no street trees. There's no fountain. So very easily you could fill in that area where there is back-out parking. Why would you want to have back-out parking into an intersection? At a corner, and to boot, the deli on the other side of the corner also backs out across the sidewalk into the intersection. As people come down the hill, a little bit of a blind spot. It's really crazy.
Fast.
And so this tries to solve all those problems. It puts a fountain back in a little green space. It adds 4 more on-street parking spaces that are protected again by curb extensions out into the parking lane. It suggests 3 new buildings, so the deli could remain, but it would be more of a substantial, more historic-looking building with parking behind it rather than in front of it.
John, you know I'm really interested in this. We've talked about it a few times. A couple questions. One, does the Historical Society have a picture of the fountain? Do we know what the fountain looked like?
I have a couple pictures of
You
that.
do? Okay.
Yeah,
It was like it was for horses, right?
yeah, it was a horse trough.
For drinking?
It was little and not so impressive.
No? Okay.
I wouldn't go that far. It
was little.
Sort of a hexagonal stone, or octagonal, I'm not sure which.
Okay.
Yeah, it is in the Beacon book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But at any rate,
I think by the end it was a big metal pail, wasn't it?
I mean, if we want to honor the history there, I think we want to have a fountain that looks like the one that was there before. And so it's good news that it's small, simple, and just nothing fancy.
Yes.
The other question I had was, when we talked about this last, we were talking about the bridge and narrowing the bridge, the bridge up to Main Street
Yes.
here. And you talked about planters. And I was talking to someone about this, and they said that it's not a good idea to put planters on a bridge because of all the water weight from the potters and stuff. And so I was wondering what your opinion of that was.
Well, you wouldn't have to put planters, big heavy planters. You could put a curb line with low plants in it. The idea is it's 27 feet wide now, which makes for 13-foot lanes, so people drive fast down that straightaway. And so if you narrowed it to 20 feet, 2 travel lanes, 10 each, and put in 2 or 3 foot plantings on the side, people on that sidewalk would have a planted buffer. That's a tourist spot. A lot of people take pictures there and back up into traffic. So you could put just a curb line with, low shrubs or low plantings that wouldn't add extra weight.
Okay.
And they could get natural drainage from the street so that they would be self-watering.
Got it.
Or you could put in smaller planters as long as somebody did a sort of structural look at the bridge and made sure it was appropriate. But my guess is those old bridges are over-designed and they can handle the weight of planters.
I see.
Is this section on, I know I can look further in the presentation, but on the bike path that is recommended, I'm just wondering if we would want to prioritize a bike lane across the bridge over planters.
You could. I'm a believer that on Main Street, and you'll see it later on, we recommend 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, and so bikes can flow with traffic. And if you get into bike lanes on Main Street, you lose parking, which is valuable for the storefronts. So you might get it on the bridge, but you couldn't get it further up because you would have to take out a lane of parking. So for Main Street, I believe that bikes can flow with traffic, and then you have bike lanes a block over for people who have families and don't want to go on Main Street. They can go parallel with Main Street. And we'll get to that. We have a chapter on bicycles as well.
I frequent this intersection a lot. I use the laundromat there, and I do find that sometimes it's hard to find parking, and so I'm a little bit concerned about taking away parking spaces there. But I believe you can just park on the street up. What's that street?
Leonard?
Leonard, yeah.
I think
So there is surplus parking, and I take away 5 spaces at the fountain, and I bring back 4 more on the street. So you're only a deficit of 1 space, and there is quite a bit of parking up Leonard Street on the west side, I think.
Yeah.
Has the committee considered, maybe it's the traffic safety committee, that would be best to look at it as stop signs and so on, like at Durkin's, at that crosswalk, or obviously I have a business right there and I see a lot of very close calls.
I bet.
This will certainly help mitigate that, but I think stop signs should be considered at some point as well.
Is there a painted crosswalk there now? Is it painted?
I think Barely, if it was, there
think
might
so,
just be a
yeah.
remnant of it, yeah.
I didn't think so.
We made a general recommendation of stop signs on every corner within 2 blocks of Main Street.
Mhm.
Because right now, everywhere you go in town, there's some corner that people will say, oh, there's 100 near misses here a week.
Yeah.
And we did go to the traffic safety committee. We got a number of those in the first block.
Still, if you're going to keep talking, you're going to need to use the mic because they won't pick up on
Yeah, I can
Zoom.
explain. Yeah. There's a lot of variation in side streets. Some have through, some have four-way. We recommended that all of the side streets be four ways, so that it's very predictable. Everybody knows when you come up to the intersection, you have to stop rather than come up, and whether they have a stop sign or not, I can't remember, because it varies almost every other intersection. We don't recommend a stop sign every block on Main Street, but we do suggest, and it'll be later in the report, that ever so often you have a stop sign or a speed table or a raised crosswalk or a raised intersection, so that people can't just zoom down Main Street between the light and then see a green light and speed up because they want to beat it, before it turns red. That happens a lot. I see that. So let's move on. We'll get to those issues.
I just want to say, because I do have a business there and I'm there a lot, it's nice that this end of Main Street is being considered a part of Main Street. It's been a sort of neglected stepchild of Main Street for a long time, and I'd like to also consider signage that directs people over there. And I think the nicer it looks, the more people will come as well, but thanks.
Yes. And we do square off the corner of Leonard Street so it doesn't come in at an oblique angle.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Things like that, little things, really make a difference in terms of safety. And just having crosswalks marked is good. I think stop sign might be appropriate coming down that hill,
Yeah,
as long as it's not so much that it's visible, and you see it long enough in advance.
yeah. Thank you.
Churchill is the most troublesome. It's the most difficult to deal with because of the hill is so steep there. Two things. We suggested curb extensions on both sides, so you would lose 3 spaces there on the west side. You would gain them further down at the diagonal parking, but you would lose 3 spaces up there, right at the apex of the curve, because people cross there all the time. And there's Churchill Public Lot down there, which is an attraction for people to come up and cross the street there. So we really felt that you need a crosswalk there. And by having a curb extension with no parked cars on that corner, it provides pedestrian visibility at the edge of the pavement. And it shortens the crosswalk. It also allows, when you get up to the top of Churchill, you get a little bit of a flat spot rather than trying to stop and start on the hill itself, which is always awkward. And because of the way that the curb extension works, you could turn right there as well as left. It seems crazy not to be able to turn right at an intersection, which is safer to turn right than to turn left.
Everybody does it anyway.
There's a variety, and then the second thing is to build a sidewalk with steps going down to Churchill, along Churchill Street to the Churchill Street public lot. And MTA owns that little piece of land next to the church, so we worked in a handicap access ramp going up that slope and creates a little pocket park with steps down where you could get a view of the mountain. So there's a lot of things going on there that would be big improvements for Churchill Street.
John, on the north side of Churchill Street or the northeast side, is it feasible to put any kind of steps on that side? I mean, there are the steps by the Matawan train station, but
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I've used this a lot, and this intersection a lot, because this is how I get to Main Street, and there's always people in the middle of the road. And it may be that because they just don't know where to go, and if we were to put a ramp and everything on the south side of the street, maybe less people would be on the road, but I'm wondering if it was feasible to do it on the other side.
It's very steep there.
Yeah.
And narrow. There were already steps going up to the station. We felt that if you were going to have anything there, you would work with the property owner to get access to those steps, rather than trying to bring them up in that really narrow spot, which is, like 45 degrees. It's hard enough to get the ramp to work on the south side. You'd never get a ramp to work on the north side.
Yeah.
Primarily because you can't mess with the height of the tracks you know, it sort of creates a contour that is hard to deal with.
And when that's transferred into a rail trail at some point, which is our hope, we would remove the tracks and try to change that crossing at Churchill and at East Main. It's hard right now, though, because they haven't even been successful in abandoning that line. They've been challenged, and there's no clear outcome yet.
The third chapter is on bicycle networks. One of the things, Beacon has done a lot of planning over the years. They've never done a bike plan, and it seems like it's a real necessity at this point. The pandemic really brought that out, that people want to be able to bike. And you have a great small block street system with a lot of side streets, so bikes are totally feasible in Beacon. It's generally level. I know there's slopes in one end and the other on the east and west end, but bikes are a really easy way to get around the city if you felt safe. And the way it is set up now with sort of hit-and-miss stop signs and no designated routes, people don't feel safe, my guess, and that's why you don't see more bicycles. But there are a lot of people who are braving it, and especially electric bikes are making it much more feasible for almost anybody to ride a bike, even people as old as me. And so what we suggest is three things. First, we thought it was good, and this was a recommendation during the pandemic. Cedar Street runs directly to the schools on the north, down pretty close to South Street Park on the south, where there's a lot of housing. People walk up Cedar to get to the schools. It's a real designated pedestrian and bike route, but no markings. And it is a one-way street. It's not a lot of traffic on it, but it leads right to the light at Verplank going to the school. So we suggested turning that into a bicycle boulevard, which is a street that's designed so the traffic can go on it for the local residents who live on the street, but there's no temptation for anybody to use it as a through street to get somewhere. You would have barriers at certain blocks and stop signs so that the bicycles would have right-of-way going north-south and the cars would have to stop going east-west. So you can do it on an experimental basis. A lot of people during the pandemic did experimental bike boulevards. We suggested at that time it didn't happen, but just even with temporary signs, try it out, do public relations with the people who live along Cedar Street and in the neighborhoods and make sure that you can make it workable so that everybody isn't unhappy. A lot of people love to be on bicycle boulevards because it's quiet, it's safe for their kids, and they still have access if they need it. You can also, if it works, if everybody seems happy with it, you can make it into a more landscaped, beautiful way to get through the city. You can see a couple examples of bike boulevards where they have traffic circles, landscaped islands to prevent cars from going through but allow bikes to go through seamlessly. We asked for more bike racks on Main Street. The planning board's been very good about any new development that's going in. We asked for at least one, maybe two bike racks. And then we suggest, because it is a fairly specialty field, people who know how to do bike planning, that and there was a grant request that we almost had for a bike plan through the Smart Growth Coordinator, and we were hoping that next year we would get it. To hire a consulting firm to do a complete bicycle plan for Beacon. We set up a sort of a projected bike route system through the city that went on parallel streets, so people who didn't want to flow with traffic on Main Street would have Oak Street or Rombat Avenue as parallel streets that go through, so you could get from the train station to the east side on a designated bike route with bike lanes or whatever. So it is possible, and we would like to suggest that the council think about that as a goal for the near future.
John, in the spirit of doing these things in baby steps before they're fully landscaped tree cycling corridors, an odd coincidence. I had a call with Senator Skoufis's office today because they were looking into a resolution that we had passed asking for permission to lower the citywide speed limit to 25 miles an hour, and I was getting the news today that it looked like it wasn't going to be able to happen, and I don't know why that is, and I'll share it with the council when I get all the details. But they thought that it was feasible possibly to do some carve-outs on specific streets and simplify the process. I'm not sure what the Traffic and Safety Committee has to go through in order to reduce the speed limit on a given street, but I think that it's easy for them to put in, just write in some carve-outs directly into the law. Would you recommend that we do that? That we recommend these cycling corridors to them, or is it too rough draft for the council to even discuss it?
Well, what we suggested was to do Cedar Street as an experiment. Do one and see how it goes. And then in the meantime, find a consultant to do a complete bike plan. And they would be able to design the sort of finished product for Cedar Street if it is successful, if there isn't too much blowback or issues.
I see.
I have a separate question. In the presentation in the agenda packet, there is an image provided by the Dutchess County Transport Council, their proposal of Beekman Street. And the image of that is something that I've seen in a lot of larger cities in general, where you have a one-way driving lane, or you have like one driving lane, you have a parking lane, and then that parking lane is buffering a bike lane. Is that something that's ever been considered for Main Street?
I think a bike plan would look at all those options. You know, a dedicated lane that's protected by parking. There was a proposal, I guess that's what you're pointing to.
Yeah, that's
going down
for Beekman Street. Yeah, has that
Beekman
ever
Street.
been something proposed?
The county has bike planners, and the city asked them to look at Beekman Street, in particular for people who use it to get back and forth to the train station. And they recommended a cycle track, which is moving the parking out and putting a protected bike lane going up the hill, and then having a sharrow coming down, because you can flow with the traffic pretty easily going down the hill, but up the hill you're slow and slow. So yes, that was proposed. It never went anywhere. It was done probably 4 or 5 years ago, I would guess. But it is an example that we wanted to showcase that, you know, there are really inventive ways to handle biking and still have parking.
Yeah, no, my primary question was this considered for Main Street?
No, mainly because Main Street is narrow enough curb to curb that you couldn't do a bike lane without losing hundreds or so parking spaces. And the storefronts, restaurants really value on-street parking. And so do customers. That's the easiest way to park if you're going to go run into a place and get back out. Those are always the first spaces to go. So, you know, maybe in the future when we all have self-driving cars and we don't need parking lanes, maybe, but not on Main Street at this point, because the parking is too dear for most of the commercial uses. But again, we think it's appropriate to have bike lanes on side streets. And there you could lose parking on one side of the street and put in a bike lane, for instance.
The Cedar Bike Boulevard idea brings to mind some of the conversations that the CAC has been having with an electric bike company, and we've recommended that they link up and talk with the Main Street Access Committee as well, because I think there's a lot of kind of synergistic planning there, if I can say that word. I can't. Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the recommendations of this electric bike company is, you know, they're recommending just throw some bikes into the city as a pilot for nothing, and then closing off streets here and there and holding festivals and just kind of seeing how it goes in the first couple of phases of the rollout. And because in my ward I'm hearing from a lot of older people an interest in electric bikes, a lot of interest. So I like that I'm hearing from 2 different city committees so much of a focus on bikes, and the Cedar Street Boulevard would be complementary to the electric bike plan that is hatching over there as well.
Yes, and it could be a very safe place to ride bikes from the schools, which is where that's sort of the highest priority you would assume for bike riders. Yeah. To provide protected place for kids to ride through the city And the only crossing they would have where there would be vehicle conflicts perhaps would be Main Street. We have a chapter on public transit. Now, remember when I said Main Street was a mile long? Well, it used to have a trolley on it from the 1890s to the 1930s, and that solved the problem because people could jump on the trolley and get up and down along this sort of mile-and-a-half long Main Street. But when the trolley went away, people became dependent on cars. Not enough people live in the business district to keep the storefronts active. You have to have people who can come from outside, and even today, more and more you have dependency on tourism to bring people to, and that's all car dependent at this point, because even though there is a free loop bus, it's not really suited for Main Street. It's too big, it's too wide. I just was out there following the loop bus just to see how it manipulated itself through. And it's very difficult. It's an 8-foot wide, 30-foot long bus that's designed for highways or arterials, not a tight fitting with a lot of side traffic and that sort of thing, Main Street. So it's very hard to manipulate. It's also a diesel bus. It's not the ideal situation. And it runs on a figure-8 loop that is good for getting maximum number of passengers, but not for servicing people who really want to get up and down Main Street. And so if you get on, say, at the library on the free loop bus, you have to go up to the mountain before you can get to the train station, because that's the way the loop works. And so you have to sort of go all the way around the city in order to get back to where you want to go. So it's not very efficient. It's not suitable for a Main Street bus. We suggest that a successful transit system combine 4 primary conditions. You have to integrate it with land uses. You have to have any new development, or most new development, should be within walking distance of a bus route. And the linkage district, the Main Street, Central Main Street district were designed exactly for that, to provide residential and employment services within walking distance of Main Street. And then you should have direct routes to destinations without unnecessary diversions or transfers. So not, if you want to go to the train station, it should be a bus that takes you to the train station without having to go all the way around the city. Frequency should be no more than 10 to 15 minutes. So you don't need a schedule. You just walk up to the shelter and wait, because it's going to be along in 5 or 10 minutes. That's the way, and there are apps these days that can keep track of where buses are, so that you have real knowledge of how long you have to wait. But waiting in a bus, I rode buses for years to work on my commute. Waiting for a bus is no fun. And so you really have to have a frequency that matches the demand. And then finally, there should be comfortable, convenient, level boarding with no steps up. Electric buses, so you don't, when you get off the bus, you don't get left in a cloud of diesel fumes, which is one of my pet peeves when I rode the county bus. And they should stop at exciting public places, not parking lots. You want people to get off and showcase the city, not get off and say, where the hell am I, So in the 2007, and then elaborated even further in the 2017 comprehensive plan, there was a very innovative way of dealing with transit as an enhancement for the city and Main Street. What they proposed was 7 new pocket parks every 3 to 4 blocks at a civic place, in which you created a welcoming center for information and activities at every bus stop along Main Street. It's a way of making the system more efficient, because people know where the buses are going to stop. The buses know where they're going to stop every 3 to 4 blocks. And it was at the train station, at City Hall, at the county center, at the library, at the post office. So there's a civic opportunity there, activities going on, and all of those, or most of those, are owned by the public entity, so that the city can actually control what goes into that place and make it into a real showcase for the city. And every bus shelter would have access information about tourist attractions for the city and whatnot. I don't know if anywhere in the country, I've looked around, I can't find anywhere has done such an interesting way of dealing with making buses integrated with land use in a city center. So we compare buses here in these photos. The one is the existing free loop, which is oversized and diesel and doesn't fit Main Street, not maneuverable enough for Main Street. You got the Cold Spring Beacon trolley bus, which is seasonal, has high steps, wooden seats, very awkward, tight, not very comfortable. For a bus, you really want easy on and off for people in wheelchairs or walkers. So what we suggest is something more like the bottom right corner, which is a 21st century bus system. Eventually, they'll be self-driving, like this one in Singapore. Has a low ADA entrance where you can just wheel up right into the bus. It's soft, it's comfortable, it's quiet. It's got windows you can see out of. There's a lot of activities that can make bus use in the city more acceptable and more attractive. And we're suggesting to really reimagine the whole bus system and make it work.
So with the free loop, and I believe most of the loop buses now, if not all of them, I don't think it steps again, and I think it just automatically lowers for people who need them. But I don't know if the trolley is going to continue this year, but if it did, do you think the trolley should have more frequency as well, or between Cold Spring and Beacon?
You know, I don't know enough about it. I would say yes. It only is 4 times a day and only seasonal, meaning in the summer seasons. So that's not very helpful, but it is helpful for people who really want to go back and forth. And I'm not saying they don't provide a good service. I'm just suggesting that if we're going to have a regular transit system on Main Street, it should be more frequent, it should be more attractive, it should have more accessible spaces.
Yeah, I mean, and I reckon
And Scenic Hudson is doing planning to implement a shuttle system between Cold Spring and Beacon as part of the Fjord Trail. So that may be some time off, but I know Ben has been staffing meetings to talk about that, and they're trying to figure out where parking areas for the trail might be along there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
My thought about the free loop is that I don't necessarily think of it as primarily or only a Main Street bus system. I'm noting that, for example, our main grocery store and our largest laundromat are on opposite ends of town right now, and that laundromat is not accessible on the free loop bus. And I would like to see and understand a map that is connecting the essential services in Beacon, as well as looking at sort of common tourist routes or just people who are commuting to the train.
I think you need more than one bus. One that goes up and down Main Street that's very...
But we have more than one bus. So we have the loop bus, but then we also have the F bus, which goes up Main Street and then out Fishkill Avenue.
Yeah.
Out to Fishkill. And then we have another one that goes to Poughkeepsie. So if you look on Dutchess County Transit, we actually have 3 buses that serve the city.
Yeah, the F bus, however, a couple of years ago, the schedule got cut back immensely. I guess, I don't know, I don't think Dutchess County saw enough ridership, and so the hours are very limited, especially in the evening. There are very few hours as far as going into Fishkill, and your earliest bus leaving is at 8 a.m., so if you want to try to get laundry done, trying to get in and out of Fishkill before work, you've got the 8 a.m. going out of Beacon, and then you have to wait until nearly 11 a.m. to get back. And so there is that, I mean, that's enough time to get laundry done, but it's a very limited space of time. And so I do think it would be valuable to find a way to get the free loop connected to some sort of laundromat as well.
The trade-off, though, is when they created this figure 8 for the loop bus, they essentially created a wing that went up to the mountain. The county tells me they've had a handful of riders on it in the years that that's existed. And what it does is it diverts the bus off of the key corridor and it reduces the frequency. So there's a trade-off between the frequency and the length of the route. So yeah, it's a careful, we're going to be meeting with them hopefully after they're absorbing the Poughkeepsie transit system right now, and they haven't had time to meet. But we are going to have a conversation about an electric bus, about a revitalized route, better connections between the routes. You know, the big bus going down Main Street, we all agree, is not the right fit.
One of the, I think the pushback on the electric bus before was that they would need to get 2 buses because of the charging time.
Yes.
But if they got a bus that was half the size, you know, maybe they can afford to.
Yeah, we're going to be making the case. Ulster County just bought 3 electric buses. So, you know, other transit agencies are looking to do it. If you have an electric bus, operating it within a city at these low speeds where you don't have, you know, you're not driving 30 miles on one route, makes sense.
Do they make electric buses narrow enough for our needs? Because I know our bus is pretty big, but part of the problem is Main Street gets narrow in a lot of different spots. And I mean, while the bus is big, it also allows for wheelchair access and disability access.
They have cut-off buses that are a lot, the length is truncated. And the problem with this bus is the back end hits things. And the mirrors get hit. So we actually have had to move a parking space to accommodate the bus. But again, I think a shorter bus is going to help the problem
And they
a
do
lot.
make slightly narrower buses
Yeah.
for narrow streets. You don't need an 8-foot wide bus in order to run down Main Street.
You know, my question just was, are those buses available? Are there smaller buses or buses that aren't as wide?
They're available if the county makes them available.
That's the spirit.
Yeah.
Yes.
So here is a map showing the projected bus route and the stops along the way. And for various grant proposals along the years, I've done design sketches, concept sketches of what each one of those stops might look like so that we might be able to attract grant requests. And so far, we haven't been successful, but perhaps one of these days we will get one. The point being is that all of these, the major ones, the ones that that would be sort of first in line, would be on city-owned or county-owned property, so that they would be efficient in terms of the city being able to suggest these are the type of amenities we want. This is the type of shelter, this is the type of park, this is the type of building that would frame it, these are the type of uses, you know, affordable housing, civic uses, maybe county or city space in these buildings. So the city would have control over what goes in these infill locations. But the idea is to create essentially a transit park, a park that was designed around a transit stop, so that when you get off the bus, you're in an attractive place rather than next to a parking lot or on a busy intersection. Now we're starting to get to the automobile stuff towards the end of the report. The traffic calming is a big issue. People are very concerned about speed on Main Street. As you can see, what we've recommended, you talked about varying widths. Well, the width of Main Street does vary, and so the traffic lanes vary because when they striped parking last time, they parked all the parking spaces at 8 feet, which is sort of standard but oversized in many cases. Cars are only 6 feet, so that gives you a lot of room. And as a result, it squeezed the travel lanes too much in 2 or 3 places. Right near the Rite Aid between Chestnut and Eliza is very narrow. It's a little over 9 feet, it should be at least. So what we suggested is that you do just the opposite. You set a narrow but not too tight travel lane width, which we've suggested at 10 feet 2 inches. And then you make the parking vary to what's ever left of the curb. And in some place it'll be a 7-foot parking space, in other place it'll be an 8-foot or a 9-foot parking space, depending on the width of curb to curb. And so that way, the traffic calming effect of narrow travel lanes will be in effect, but you won't clip mirrors, because in certain places it's too narrow now.
Is this something we'd have to figure out and decide now because Main Street's being built?
It's being implemented as we
Okay.
speak. So thanks to the Main Street Access Committee and John Clark, we had this on the radar when we talked about restriping Main Street. So the striping company knows to go off the center line, 10-foot 2 lanes, variable parking space markings, and we even went to the all of the crosswalks are going to be the Abbey Road. I forget what the technical name is. Continental?
Continental or ladder bar.
All right. So they've had, their impact is going to be felt in the restriping on Main Street that you're going to see in about a week and a half.
And are they going all the way back to Churchill Street and the changes there in the parking? Are they taking out some of those parking spaces in anticipation of those Abbey Roads on page?
No, we're basically
No.
replacing the existing walkways, crosswalks with new crosswalks. And then on Main Street, I think they're 8 feet in width, and then on the side streets, we've made them 6 feet in width, because the side streets don't need the 8 feet. But it'll improve it, and then what we can do is go back and as we implement other pieces of this, it's not a lot of extra work to go back and restripe a few areas.
Crosswalks will be a traffic calming effect in and of themselves. But there are other things. The curb extensions that were put in will be traffic calming. The narrower lanes, for the most part, will be traffic calming. We've recommended 20-foot speed limits on Main Street, 20 miles per hour, sorry. If you see the graph up on the left, it shows that at 20 miles per hour, if you get hit by a car as a pedestrian, you have a 10% chance of dying. If it's 30 miles an hour, which is a lot of what people drive on Main Street now, it's 4 out of 10. And if it's 40 miles, which some people drive on Main Street, it's 8 out of 10. So just reducing the speeds by 2 measures, putting up a sign that says 20 miles, 20 is plenty, is the phrase that goes around with a lot of Main Streets these days. I drove Main Street from Bank Square to Fountain Square at 20 miles an hour, and it took me, I think, a minute and a half less than going at 30 miles an hour. You know, it's not that big a deal. You can slow people down, you don't lose a lot because you have to stop for the light anyway. It makes such a difference with pedestrians to go 20 miles an hour versus 30 miles an hour that it's really worth the effort to deal with the state government and whatever rigmarole you have to go through to get at least Main Street down to 20. We recommended 20 on the 2 side streets next to Main Street as well, because people use those because of the one-way street system around Main Street. We also suggest that there could be opportunities for either always stops on Main Street, a couple of them, so that you don't have those long straightaways between Chestnut and Cliff in which people build up speed. So at Elm or one of the other interim, you could have either a 4-way stop or a raised intersection in which you ramp up 10 feet, flat table at the same level as the curb so that pedestrians don't have to walk down to the street, they cross directly at the street level, and then you ramp down, and it's like a speed bump, but it doesn't jar your car or, isn't nearly as obnoxious, but you feel it. You go up and you level off and then you go down. And so it's not a problem for plows or emergency vehicles or automobiles, but it makes a big difference in terms of slowing people down at a few intersections. We're only talking about maybe one on the west side, one on the east side between Cliff and Chestnut on the west, and between Teller and Tyranda on the east. Maybe as a raised crosswalk where the intersection of the Van Nydyck parking lot access is. That's a long block, and having a raised crosswalk there would be very helpful.
Well, it seems like one of the places we would want to slow traffic down definitely would be where we are having the bike trails,
At Cedar.
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And we're going to try this on the Fishkill Avenue project that I'm trying to get to bid by the end of this year. So there are 2 raised speed tables between the crossing of Ron's Ice Cream and the park. So we'll have firsthand experience with this, hopefully, in the near future.
And that's a lot of traffic there.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So I've talked about the 4 traffic calming recommendations that are on the bottom of the page there.
Sorry, before we move off that section, I wanted to go back to the delivery truck example of somebody parking in a loading zone. Obviously, that's a bad spot for visibility and safety, as you note, but I have heard from a handful of business owners on Main Street that they have issues with loading zones and the deliveries that they do get.
Yep.
Has that been considered in any part of this plan? I know that you said you postponed the business survey, but the businesses do need their deliveries one way or another.
Yes. Now, the example here, that'll be stopped by the curb extensions, because right now they tend to park at the end of the block where you can't park, and it really blocks the intersection. Sometimes it blocks the crosswalks. So that's really bad. So the curb extensions at the corners would take care of that. It's a disincentive to do that sort of parking in the stripe spaces. But there is a need for parking loading zones along Main Street. If you go to the end of the report, that's one of the things that the committee is looking at right now. They're doing a business survey which has questions about loading zones. So they wanted to gather more information before they made decisions about where to do it. There was the hope that maybe you could do them off Main Street. So take a corner, the first couple spaces would be a loading zone rather than having it on Main Street itself, because those are more valuable parking spaces. But we wanted to get input from the business owners before we made those decisions.
But no part of sort of the plan as we're moving forward in it precludes adding a loading zone somewhere later. Yes?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry. If after the survey, we decide we do want to put loading zones on Main Street, I know the theory is that they'll be off Main Street, but if we decide we do want to put them on Main Street, we can still do that, even though we're restriping now.
Yeah, you can. I mean, it's just a striping issue and a signage issue. But ideally, I think that we will probably be looking for spaces off Main Street to put loading zones.
And it's also a trade-off with parking. You have again, we're trying to maximize the number of spaces we can get in there, so we should be careful about where we decide to put those and preclude. Sometimes you just have 2-hour zones, and that might be the compromise. Rather than striping it differently, you just sign it to say this is a loading zone between here and there for these hours.
Yeah.
All right, now we're into parking, which is everybody's big debate. And we fought with parking for a long time. We did as much information gathering as we could during the pandemic when things were all out of whack, so we couldn't really do the traditional parking capacity survey. But we came up with a 3-part strategy. First, let's say that the committee agreed that there should be no new parking lots. You shouldn't be knocking down buildings to put up parking lots the way it was done in the 70s. And in fact, it would be better if we reclaim some of those lots, those sort of dead spaces that have 100 cars in them or whatever. They create whole blocks worth of unattractive streetscapes. But we still need parking, and everybody agrees that you need parking, or most everybody agrees you need parking. So we came up with a 3-part strategy. And the idea would be you go through phase 1, and if it satisfies the parking demand for the time being, you stick with it until things get bad again or get worse. Then you might go to phase 2 and then phase 3. But phase 1 essentially says there's a more efficient ways to find parking on existing asphalt without creating any new parking lot or paving any new surfaces, or at least not paving any new parking lots. You can create quite a few parking spaces. So you could satisfy this sort of immediate demand by just being more efficient and looking for places to put parking that can't do it already. So for example, the Henry Street lot, the way it's laid out is very inefficient. They don't have diagonal parking on the street like the east end of Henry Street, even though the street's the same width. The parking lot behind the health center there is very inefficient. No landscaping, doesn't have sufficient backup widths. The entrance don't align with the parking aisles. So by restriping the existing lot, you could get 12 more spaces, plus a more functioning parking lot with opportunities for landscaping. So you could dress it up, you get 12 more spaces just by doing a striping exercise. Fishkill Avenue at the bottom of the page, that street is wide enough to put a lane of parking on one side, which would protect the sidewalk, slow down traffic. It is a state highway, so you need DOT approval, but you could get 22 new parking spaces just by restriping it, because the lanes are too wide the way it is now.
We are going to be reconfiguring Fishkill Avenue next year, though, so that will have new sidewalks on both sides. I'll have to get you the plans so you can see if that still works.
I'm sorry, on Henry Street, there is some diagonal parking on there, right?
Yeah, on the east end there's diagonal parking, but on the west end there's
So you
parallel.
want it all, on both sides as well?
There's no reason not to have diagonal on both.
Okay.
And you get 7 more spaces on the street
Great.
just by restriping it.
Both ends, but not both sides.
Right.
Yeah.
It's diagonal on the north side and parallel on the south. It's 49 feet wide. You can't get diagonal on both sides.
Gotcha.
So you can get 22 new spaces within a block of Main Street just by restriping Fishkill Avenue. So we looked at all the parking lots, the publicly owned parking lots. It turns out that the city and the county combined owns 9 acres of parking lots along Main Street alone. That's 400,000 square feet. It's a lot of value to put into tax-exempt, non-productive in the case of tax generation and activity generation. The end of the box on the bottom, those are our short-term parking recommendations. We did these 2 years ago almost. And they stripe spaces on blocks adjacent to Main Street. So you don't have stripe spaces on the side streets, even though people park really inefficiently. So you lose a lot of spaces because people take up a parking spot and a half when they stop off Main Street. So just getting the striping on the first block or the second block would add quite a few new spaces. The Fishkill Avenue, Henry Street, the county center lot, and I'll go to that next, is very inefficiently laid out again. Right now it's 92 spaces. I can get you 129 spaces just by restriping the rear half of the lot. That's 37 additional spaces, which is a considerable number without having to do any extra pavement. The Eliza Street lot, that was accomplished. It's one of the few things that has been done that was recommended. That had a lot of 10-foot spaces. We redid it and went from 92 to 103 spaces just by restriping it. We also did a survey of just that block around the Eliza Street lot, and you gain, I think it was 18 additional spaces overall if you stripe Eliza Street, stripe Chestnut, stripe West Church, and restripe the parking lot. And you get, better landscaping and better handicap access and all the things to do if you really take a look and design a parking lot for its best way of doing it.
John, isn't Church already striped this way?
Chestnut is striped, but not Church. No, the diagonal part is striped, but not the one across the north side is not striped. So the diagonal on Church is striped, and Chestnut is striped, but not Eliza or the north side of Church Street. And so just by reconfiguring, and we got 18 new spaces. We also set up parking standards for striping, and you can see that in the yellow box at the bottom, how wide a typical space should be, how long it should be, The end spaces that you can pull directly in without the sort of parallel parking between two cars can be shorter. So these are going to be the standards, I believe, that are going to be used on Main Street, which will make for additional parking on Main Street as well. And then finally, we have the Walcott Avenue idea, where City Hall and West End Lofts are. You could park along that entire street, turn it into a boulevard with planted median in the center, and get 25 new spaces, again, within a block of Main Street.
I think the new Firehouse letting out there might cut away half of those trees. Because
yes, they would have to be a bigger opening there, definitely.
Yeah.
This was done well before the Firehouse decided to have their access on Walcott, not south.
Yeah, but I like the idea a lot.
Yeah, it would make a big difference. The arterial is designed as a highway. It should be designed as a boulevard. I'm getting to the end now, if you're looking at the clock.
Oh, no, I wasn't
Okay.
looking. I can't see that far anymore.
So wait a minute, let me go back one. So phase two, if indeed we create 180 new parking spaces.
Before you get on to phase two, a question is later on about your recommendation to try to redo the parking analysis that was last done in 2014. Would you recommend that we do that before we do anything like phase two?
Yes.
Okay. Should we be doing that now, even as we implement phase one? Would that be your recommendation?
We were waiting until Main Street got restriped, and the pandemic had settled down, which I think this summer or this fall, we should do a parking capacity study to repeat the 2014, see where we are comparatively.
Okay, thank you.
And phase two certainly wouldn't happen before that was done, to get a real good understanding of capacity issues,
And
where they're short.
We've
where
got
they're-
quite a bit of phase one to still do.
Yes,
Like
yeah.
I just have a really random question about implementing trees in the middle of Wolcott Avenue. Would having like deciduous trees in the middle of that road create any slippery hazards like during the fall?
Well, it depends on what sort of trees. There are street trees that have little leaves that sort of dry up and blow away, rather than oak trees or maple trees that dump a lot of leaves. And so you have to pick the variety of trees that you put in planted mediums to be very hardy, salt tolerant. Usually you want small leaves, no fruit, that gets things messy. So it's difficult to find the absolute right street tree, but there are out there.
And we have trees all along all of our roadways. We have street sweepers to take care of that. So I don't think we should stop planting trees.
Listen, I'm not against trees.
Why don't you want the trees?
I'm not against trees, Chris.
Let's go bowling, Justin.
So phase two, if indeed we've done everything we can to exhaust new parking, and we do a traffic study and we still find out that we're short parking spaces, the next step, the phase two step, would be instituting paid parking, or at least considering it. Paid parking is a proven way to manage demand. People do make choices based on payments, and in particular, your peak parking problems are primarily caused on weekends by tourists. And so why are you allowing people to come in, jam up the streets and the parking lots, and not contribute? Have the city residents pay for, and the businesses pay for all the parking that is primarily the problem is caused by people coming in from outside. Because in most cases, that's my perception, and again, the traffic capacity study would help, the parking problem is not on Wednesday afternoon, it's on Saturday afternoon. So paid parking is a way of gathering revenue to help the city pay for parking improvements from people who are causing the peak problems. You could institute paid parking, for instance, only on weekends when there is heavy tourist use, and during the week when more residents use the streets, they wouldn't have paid parking. There's parking meters these days are very sophisticated. You can change the time of day cost so that you can manage peak parking demand down to the hour. You can do it on certain days and certain evenings. And you can vary it. It's just computer run. It's not like the old crank systems. And you don't have to have a parking meter at every space. So there are ways to raise revenue and to drive demand down by using paid parking. The theory is you want to up the cost enough to create a parking space on every block, so that people don't have to drive around looking for a parking space. There's always one available because the price is high enough that discourages one parker per block from parking there. I know that's a controversial issue. It's going to be a tough fight, but that's a phase 2 consideration. It's the next way of dealing with parking demand if you've maxed out the capacity of parking.
And John didn't mention that one of the early phase 1 items was to better sign the parking lots. People didn't know the parking lots were a block off Main Street, and then they fought for all of those precious spots on Main Street. You can see the blue signs that were designed by the committee and put up that now say the municipal center is available on weekends. All of these parking lots now have a name, and you have a sign off of Main Street telling you where to go, and that's really already made a difference. When we just did the milling today, everybody had to get their cars off the street, and now everybody knows where all of the lots are and that they're allowed to park there.
Well done.
So that signage was really a great start towards all of this.
Yeah, a couple of committee members spent a lot of time designing signs and making sure the graphics were just right.
And we finally
And
have
so now you have a
almost all of them
consistent set of
installed.
signs at every parking lot. So that's phase 2. The 2000 parking analysis that was done back in 2014 estimated, and I don't have any way of confirming that just on Main Street, if you had paid parking, the city could get between $612,000 and $867,000 a year, which is a lot of money to help pay for the cost of all that tax-exempt parking that costs the city, generally speaking, $50 a space every year for striping, plowing, paving, land costs, and the rest of it. And then we have a phase 3. If, for instance, people don't want to do phase 2, they decide they can't handle paid parking and there's still a real heavy parking demand, then the next step is to go for parking structures. Parking structures have a couple advantages. They free up space. They're more efficient from the point of view of land coverage, heat island effect. You can green up roofs. You can put solar canopies on parking structures. There are ways to hide them. I show a couple examples of facades, treatments, and liner buildings. Most people go for liner buildings that way, which you put a thin layer of residential or commercial building along the edges of a parking lot so it's completely hidden inside, and people back up to that space. There are only 2 spaces that I could find on Main Street that are susceptible to a parking structure. One is the Eliza Street lot because it's a little longer and wider than the other 2 public parking lots, and the county center lot, which has the advantage of having a little bit of a steep edge on one side, so the ramp is not as much of a problem. When you have a flat site, you have to design it with a ramp up, which you lose efficiencies in parking because of the ramp. So the county lot, actually, you can enter on the high side to the second floor or the low side to the first floor, and that makes it more efficient. So I show a couple conceptual designs. I'm not an expert in parking lot design, but I know enough to do a concept design. So on the left there is the county center lot shown as 290 spaces. That's a 2-story building, so it's no higher than the houses that surround it. It has 3 levels, 1, 2, 3, 1 on the roof. So it's a 2-story building. You would have the ramp on the high side so that it's more efficient. You could get up to 290 spaces, I estimate, on the back portion of that lot and still have room for a park and a building on the front portion of the lot, which would give you a very high net gain and would be able to supply surplus parking for the West End. On the concept plan to the to the right, we show an idea for all 3 public parking lots. So you put a parking structure on the Eliza Street lot, and you can reclaim the 2 lots on Henry Street for other uses. The not-for-profit health enterprise there has expressed to us the desire to expand, so you could have expanded health facilities on the Chestnut side of the Henry Street lots. Still have parking under the building, so you wouldn't lose all parking from those spaces. But you would build over the parking with a 2 or 3-story building and reclaim those spaces for active uses. So the health, we talked to them about having expanded health services, storefronts along Main Street, so you don't have that ugly storefront facade, lack of storefront facade, and you would have an urgent care. They wanted to do an urgent care. That was a couple of years ago. I don't know if their plans have changed, but you could still have 2 rows of parking underneath there and reclaim most of the parking that's already on that lot. The same for the other one on the Teller Avenue side of Henry Street. We targeted that for affordable housing, 3-story building over a parking structure, parking level on the first floor. And you would get a net gain of parking in the area, plus activate all 3 of those parking lots, because the 2 Henry Street lots would have development on them with frontages, active frontages, and the Eliza Street would have liner buildings on Chestnut and Eliza, so you wouldn't see the parking structure from the street on those 2 sides.
Hey, John, it's Lee.
Yes.
I think he just mentioned if we were to build something above either of those, are we talking a level of parking and then 3 stories above that?
They're in the central Main Street district, so they could go 4 stories with a step back.
Okay.
You wouldn't have to do it. It's up to the city. The city owns the lot, so they could put out a proposal, request for proposal for any configuration they want or any uses they want, and pick the developer and have a site plan pretty much decided in a public setting. But yes, they're in the central Main Street district, so they could be 4 stories high with a step back along Henry Street. I did a rough conceptual design for the one where the mixed-use building is shown with affordable housing. And by putting a building there, you could put in 50, 60 housing units and lose 7 spaces overall. So you would still have a substantial number of on-street, off-street parking on that lot underneath the building. And that was just a rough estimate, but if you're interested in affordable housing, that would be a place where the city could target a parcel for a high percentage or a high ratio of affordable units and still maintain a parking presence on that lot that was almost as much as you have now. And you could make up those 7 spaces by restriping Henry Street on the other end. So you could get a net. Now that assumes that the people who move in are zero car households. And you could do that. There are places where people rent out buildings to people who guarantee that they won't have a car. Or if they have a car, they'll rent a private space in somewhere in the neighborhood. So it can be done. It's been done in other cities. So there are a lot of options on the table in terms of parking. The phase 1 is to create more parking spaces within a block or 2 of Main Street just through restriping. Phase 2 would raise money. It would help with financing phase 3 if that's the direction the city wants to go. And here's some examples on the right of liner buildings, facade buildings, existing buildings in a historic district. That's a parking structure on the left there with just a facade treatment. You can do green facades. You can do liner buildings. That's residential, and there's a parking structure behind that building. And it's only that that residential liner building is only 20 feet wide. There is a list of funding sources in the report, potential funding sources if you're interested in how to finance parks and perhaps parking structures. And a list of ongoing topics that the committee is working on as we speak. I think they're putting out a memo on snow removal shortly.
They should talk to our DPW if you're going to make recommendations on snow removal. Please.
So the final slide is the back cover, and it just shows how the sort of Main Street ideas can be connected to a larger trail system and a bike system and a street system, a boulevard system, so that it connects to the waterfront parks, to the mountain access places. So you start thinking about the city as a network of greenways, bike routes, and public parks that act as stepping stones up Main Street.
One thing that I'm thinking about as we've been talking about this, there's some ideas that we've seen before, and there's some new ideas in here. And the thing that always comes to mind for me is, well, how are we going to get this done? And I'm looking at each of some of these recommendations and just trying to figure out, well, okay, so we don't want to have signage in the middle of the sidewalks. Well, do we just update? Does that mean we're going to update our sign law so that we say that there's no signs in the middle of the sidewalk? Or we're looking at these intersections. What does it cost to upgrade one of these intersections? I have no idea. I don't know whether to be recommending it for the capital plan, that we do brick by brick out of our regular budget, or what. And also, you don't want to be looking for solutions where there are none also. So like, how do we take a lot of these recommendations, and has there been any thought on the committee to like take all these recommendations and say, this is a policy change, this requires $1.5 million, this is a $3 million project, whatever. How do we get this done?
Yes, well, there are shorter and longer term in here.
Yeah.
So there's sort of setups. Obviously, concentrate on the short term, low cost restriping sorts of things. Get started. We felt like there needs to be a public process before we start setting up, capital budgets. So the priority would come out of public meetings and public comments from the council and other people, from the Traffic Safety Committee, from the CAC, whoever. So we haven't done the sort of project by project cost analysis. We have funding ideas. I have done, for some of the grants that we've proposed, done cost estimates on a few things. So it can be done.
Did you do cost estimates?
I think the public process would set up the priorities for the sort of longer and bigger budget items, so that you would say which ones catch on fire. Is it the bike boulevard, or is it fix the East Main Street intersection? And some of it can be just done by the council as part of the annual budget. In discussions with DPW or whoever.
I would also just say we are beginning to implement this and look for opportunities to do this. The bump out project is well within the scope of this, and we're not closed out on that project, but the bump outs are in. All of the repaving that we're doing has been affected by this, and the signs. We are going to be in the capital program that we bring to you, we're going to be repaving Van Nydek. So as we do each of these parking lots, we build it in at the time that we do it. In addition, one of the parklets, we may have state funding, and it hasn't been announced yet, so I'm not going to put it out there, but one of the parklets may advance before the others because we may have funding. So part of it is the conversations that we have with our state representatives and others about funding, and just lining up the opportunity with the ask.
Does anybody have any other questions? No? Thank you very much, John. I really appreciate it, and thank the committee for all the hard work. And we hope the public gets an opportunity to look at these online, and then as we develop, there'll be an opportunity for the public to comment as well, right?
Right, the report was posted, so I urge everybody to read the whole thing, give more background analysis. And we're always available for comments.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Item number 2 on our agenda is authorizing the city administrator to execute an agreement with eMaint Enterprises LLC for computerized maintenance management systems services. I assume Chris will explain this to us.
I'm going to do my best. I don't have the computer in front of me, but when our chief wastewater treatment plant operator, Dave Tavernier, came on last summer, one of the things we talked about is trying to implement a more regular system with maintenance of all of the parts of the wastewater treatment plant. Thanks, John. Thank you. One of the ways to do that is a software product called Computerized Maintenance Management System, and we eMaint is a system that Dave Tavernier was familiar with and had used in other facilities, and he thought that that would be beneficial here. This contract basically is a 3-year contract. It sets up the software, which is very specialized. There's a kickoff where they come and they figure out all of the systems in our plant, which is a 4A plant and different from some of the other plants in the area. Figure out what needs to be replaced periodically, sets up a work order system. It also has reporting for compliance so that when we do, like we just did an audit with US EPA, and it would generate information on our maintenance needed for those. So the first year is the setup, and then there's a subscription for the 2 subsequent years. So we'd like to promote that. We did put it in the budget last year as one of the new initiatives in the wastewater treatment plant, and we think that will help us do a more methodical job of maintenance with things like the belt press and the various settling tanks.
Is the recommendation from Dave that some member of his staff or himself get trained in being able to troubleshoot this software, or that we pay to have the company come in when there are issues?
They will all be trained on the software. So all of the operators and the maintenance staff will learn how to interact with the system. But if there are updates that are needed, like let's say we implement a new dewatering system and move from a belt press to a centrifuge, which is something that we're thinking about doing, we would just have to make the updates with the company.
Okay.
So, and it does so, and the product does come with, kickoff training and then support along the way.
Does it come with hardware?
No, we provide a couple computers, so we're through our IT budget, we're going to pick up a couple extra computers. A lot of it is them trying to figure out how to specify this to our plant, because each plant is different, so they need to understand when was this last done, how often does it need to be done, who takes care of this, what time frame do you have to implement the work, and then what reporting do you want out of it.
And this new software, is it going to control key functionality, or it's more about reporting and kind of updating?
The latter. It's more about issuing work reports. The only thing that, it doesn't replace any of the things that our staff do, other than to kind of organize the workflow and then the data from that workflow.
And I saw the company was based in Florida. I assume that's just happens to be where they are. That the reason why there wasn't a closer option is because that's where this particular specialized company is based.
Yeah, for the eMaint system, that's the company that licenses that product and develops it. And you may remember we just did another thing. We take in outside haulers, and we've moved to an online portal. So we're trying to take operations that began in the 60s and they were all analog, and we're trying to digitize a lot of what we do and make it easier to do the reporting that we need to for outside agencies.
Okay. Anybody else? No? All right, on to item 3 of the agenda is authorizing the city administrator to execute an agreement with Mitchell Associate Architects, PLLC, for architectural design services for Tompkins Hose Firehouse. I think it's self-explanatory. Do you want to give us details?
So this is a follow-up to the presentation that our architect, Bob Mitchell, did at council. Again, for those that didn't watch that episode, that is a gut renovation of our 10,000 square feet at Tompkins Hose, plus an addition of 6,400 feet of new bays. It basically takes us from 3 bays to 5 bays, streamlines the operation of that facility so that decontamination can be done. This agreement is the first step in a longer agreement that will be amended as we go. So this is for $250,000 for design development. That will take us from where we are today, which is conceptual design, to final design. They'll go through and work with our staff and confirm all of the things that we think and make sure the building works. And then the next phase would be drawing up construction documents to go to bid. So the goal here is for us to go out to bid probably by December or January of this, December this year, January of next year, so that we could break ground in spring for an approximately 14-month project. So we'll be bringing this contract back to you for amendments for construction oversight, for construction drawings, then construction oversight, because the architect is still going to be with us through construction and will review all the submittals and keep an eye on the progress of the job. So this is getting this finally off the drawing board and towards bid.
Would part of this process, this preliminary process, involve doing like topographical, or not, maybe not topographical, but
geotechnical?
Yeah, just seeing what is there.
Yeah.
Because I heard previously when they were considering doing work there that they were concerned that either it was going to be full of fill from urban renewal and or solid granite or shale or something like that.
Yeah, so in addition to the architectural budget, we have in the capital program $45,000 for subsurface investigations and survey work. So we'll have to do detailed topographic survey. We're going to do geotechnical borings on both the north side and on the parking lot side, where we're thinking about putting geothermal wells. And again, if you don't have the right medium there, like again, if somebody just did fill like they did on this property years ago, that might not work. So we will, that is definitely part of this design development phase.
Great.
Bedrock's good for geothermal, right? I think bedrock
Yeah,
is
the
good.
bedrock is really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
It's cheaper, you can just do a well.
Yeah.
But like here on this building, when they built this facility, they took all the trees that were here, bulldozed them into a pile and then covered them. And so you can see we continue to have sinkage in our parking lot over time. So we, like on the back side of the parking lot, you can see it settling over time.
Chris, do you think in the middle of the design development phase, or when it's appropriate in this phase, we could get an update on the plans? The reason I'm asking is there's so much to love about the plans that we saw, and I'm supportive of all of it, but the one part that was a little iffy to me was the look of it, was the exterior, and it didn't seem to be a beacon firehouse to me. It just seemed kind of I don't know, almost like mall design or something. And I was wondering if there was going to be more work done on the exterior, or more versions of the exterior.
Yeah, if you look at the contract, we've put in 4 meetings with the council and the public.
Okay, great.
So we've asked him to come back on, like it wouldn't make sense necessarily to say, what do you think about the layout of the decontamination site? Because that's really specialized. But the things like the environmental attributes, the aesthetics of the site, perhaps the layout of the parking area, all we want feedback. So
All right.
yeah, we will bring this back to you, and Bob knows that that's part of the scope of work.
Great, thanks.
And I wasn't, I mean, it was a cool rendering that he did, but it was, again, not meant to be the final. It was like, this is just the massing of the building.
I see, okay.
Ready?
All right.
One other question. Sorry, I've seen the design development phase. It has a plus minus 23.4%. Does that mean it could, even before we approve any further stages, that it could actually be more like another 60,000 or so on top of the 250? I'm not sure how that percentage works.
Well, he took his total, which is just over $1 million.
Yeah.
And what he's saying is the design development is approximately 23.4% of
Oh, I see.
of that
the 1
phase.
million.
Now,
Okay.
the only thing that's subject to change from this, and you'll see this built in, is depending on the heating system that we go with and the eventual cost of that when it goes to bid, there may be a little bit more design. It's a little more expensive to design an all-electric building and to use either air or ground heat pumps. But again, I think that was worth us doing. I don't think building a gas-fired, building at this point makes any sense.
And is the construction of the actual firehouse, the part that might begin next year, what you're going to bring to us in the capital budget?
You bet.
Great.
Yes, it's the big Christmas present under the tree. I don't know what else we can fit under the tree, but we're seeing what we can do this week, and we will be presenting a capital plan to you on May 9th. And Susan Tucker will be here to explain it.
Great.
It's my birthday.
It's your birthday? Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay, the final item on the agenda is a discussion regarding the selection of Community Investment Program recipients.
Well, so again, if people didn't tune in last week, Mark Price from our Recreation Department had come to talk about applications that we received under the Community Investment Program, and that's a $20,000 line item that the council put in the budget for 2022. When they did that, they asked us at that time to make it available to nonprofits, make it as flexible as possible to see what we could do. We did get 10 applications during the period. Just to give some structure to this, I asked Mark Price to go through and try to do a recommendation of 3 or 4 projects, which he did and offered to you. And again, I think what we tried to do, we didn't go as far as to have a scoring committee, and again, we can do that in the future. This was a first run at it, and we tried to do one project in each category. So you have one in mental health, and you have another in youth job placement, and then just straight recreation as well.
So how do we want to go through this? Because, Mark Price did offer his recommendations. I have some thoughts on where funding could be otherwise. And I also just have some thoughts on the categories in general and what's categorized as what. Although I didn't realize youth was supposed to be like youth job, because I was going through it and I was like, well, if youth is just the category, then the foundation for Beacon School seems like youth, Beacon Youth Football seems like youth. So recreation, it's this category specifically youth jobs, right? Or
Yeah, it was like youth employment.
Okay.
And where this line item came out of was, I think for at least 2 years, we funded Green Teen, which is a program run out of the 23 West Center Street facility where young people learn how to do farming, and that food is then raised and given to the community, and then they do a whole bunch of other things, like they're planting sunflowers this year in front of the wastewater treatment plant, which will be amazing.
So we don't fund them anymore?
We did last year. We funded them at either 8 or 10,000.
So would we fund them again if we didn't vote to fund them this way?
No. No, and they would presumably then offer less slots at their program. We did that in exchange for getting additional slots. Oh, and Ben reminds me, thank you, Ben, that the film program does not have a fee to participate. I know that was asked last week.
So I've been thinking about this in two ways, if you don't mind, Justice. So I've been thinking about this as, could these programs be replaced and what would that look like? But really what I want is more money so we can just do more of them. So, I don't know, we talked about different things last year, like mailers and participatory budgeting, and part of those discussions was, well, if we need the extra money, we can find it out of the, whatever, I forget what it's called, the reserve, which is, much of it I know is typically earmarked for other things, but could we, if we wanted to, tap into that for a budget amendment for $5,000 or $10,000 to add something?
You could. Yeah.
Just if we didn't want push to come to shove, if we wanted if we liked 5.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a budget amendment from fund balance to this.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't recommend we make that a habit.
Right. I think this program just kind of stands out as like, oh, but it's a shame that we can't do, there's so
Yeah.
many good ideas in here.
Are you suggesting add the 5 to the 4 applicants that were proposed, or bring in some of the other applicants?
I think Justice wanted to, I don't want to get into my suggestions because I'm interrupting Justice's suggestions, but there was one that I wanted to add related to health, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, my biggest question is how do we want to go through this discussion? Do we want to go through service by service and give our opinions, or I guess program by program, or how do we want to do this?
One of the things that we do when we're doing selection committees that I find helpful is to try to figure out right away if you have consensus on the top and bottom. So maybe you want to look at these and say, this one I'm good with, and then we start to chip away at how much money we have. So why don't you figure out, are there any on the, if I could, George, are there any on the 4 recommended ones that you all might have consensus that we do, and then let's figure out what we fund it at, and then we'll work down through it. And that's the reason we did recommendations. I'm just trying to figure out some structure, because otherwise we're just throwing around 10 things and 10 numbers. And
Well, I guess one of the and maybe it was answered last week, but I forget, the Beacon Youth Football, it says that this spending is going to be spent on scholarship fund. Does that imply that there's a fee associated with it?
it won't be used for scholarship. With the amount that we're doing, it will be equipment, and it will likely be, actually it will, this is morphing into, there need to be some repairs to the building that they use, and they have somebody that's willing to do all the labor if we maybe buy some materials. So that may be morphing towards the flooring and then the equipment.
But nevertheless, does it still imply that there's a fee associated?
I don't know if there's a fee, but I would assume there's like a nominal fee.
It seemed that way based off of the application that I was looking at, because of the scholarship fund that was provided to create more access for people. So then I guess people would have to pay a fee to be involved. And that was one of my biggest concerns with the Beacon Youth Football, was that it doesn't seem like it's going to be something that's accessible to everybody, or at least all of the kids that would want to. And I am very interested in seeing this play out. I think it would be fun to have youth football, and I think there's room for it to expand. But I also just see right now, it doesn't seem like this is something that would provide as much access to people.
Yeah, I agree. If we were to give $2,500 to them, I would want to give them $2,500 so that there's no cost to be a part of the program.
Yeah, that was one of the things that, I mean, I guess Paloma brought that up last week, just not with this specifically, but in general, the cost barrier for some of these programs. And one of my general thoughts in looking at this was, how can this program, or whatever somebody is applying for, give the most access to the most people, you know, and what provides the most access to the most people, and I guess has the greatest impact that way. That was one of my general thoughts. But I want to jump back to what Chris was saying about going through what we generally have a consensus on.
And, you know, I don't know what the cost structure is, and I can ask them for that, but having a cost doesn't mean you have an obstacle. I mean, sometimes these are nominal fees that just help to pay for a shirt, or they pay a little bit for refreshments. And again, I don't know if this fee is $10 or it's $200. So we can find out about that.
I would love to get more information on that for sure.
Okay.
I also
we'll make a
think-
list of the follow-up items.
I mean, it wouldn't be the only sports program in the city where you have to pay to be a part of it. But
Yeah.
I think that I think these kinds of things, there shouldn't be any fees.
I do too. That being said, I don't think giving them $2,500 would necessarily be a bad thing to start up, because it isn't available anymore right now, and they are like building from the ground up. And I think this would help them give it a shot, and we could just encourage them to do what they can. But it also seems like it's all volunteers, and they're So I don't know. Part of me does want to just like.
And sometimes just having a nominal fee, there's a little bit of commitment. So like when you're thinking about quitting 3 weeks in, you know, you might rethink that. I mean, we do fees on a number of our programs. So like the pool, for instance, isn't free. And so if you make an appointment and you pay the fee, you generally show up, and then you just, again, sometimes these nominal fees aren't the worst thing to have, just so people have a little bit of investment in the program, as long as they're not precluded from it. And then low-income people, you have some. We haven't turned away people, but again, the fees do help to extend the range of services you could offer. Because if you had no fees, again, a lot more is going to have to come out of our budget. And I was looking online. I don't see that immediately, but I'll find out their fee structure.
Okay, sorry.
Maybe another way to do it that would be more efficient is if you want to put together a list of questions that you have on the various programs, and maybe you all rank these and put a dollar amount, and then we can collate that and present that back to you.
I started putting dollar amounts to some of the things because, I mean, thankfully, most of the applications, they had like the dollar breakdown of what they would be spending on.
Yeah.
And I was of two minds of this because, like, I do a lot of community organizing work, and I see the nonprofit industrial complex, and it's a system set up for burnout. And so there were some applications here that were like requesting money for staffing, and I was hesitant with that because I don't feel like it's necessarily the city's role to be paying for another organization's staffing, but at the same time with community organizations that are providing food to people that don't have food, I can see how that is a genuine need. And I was just wondering, or my thought process was that maybe this particular funding isn't for that, but maybe there's another way we can find to support them in one way or another. Like, for instance, with Common Ground, they ask for like specific things. They're looking for a trailer and for insulation for the trailer and vegetable bins. And I mean, I don't think that necessarily we have to provide all of that, but a lot of these things also intersect. Like Fairground intersects with Common Ground, intersects with Green Teen. And so what is one thing that we can fund that would ultimately help out more things, you know? That's just sort of where my thought process was going, and maybe if we're not even fully funding all of these, because even in the amounts requested, Mark offered, his recommended fundings were less than. I think there's opportunity I mean, obviously you're not going to be able to please everyone unless you have a limited budget, but I think there is an opportunity to at least offer a little more to some of these programs, especially ones that are going to be offering things that are free to larger masses. One of the things that I was definitely interested in was the Howland 150 anniversary exhibition, because I think that is a situation where it's showcasing a history of Beacon that we don't otherwise see. And I think that one falls under community and education, but it seemed like this program would be free, and I mean, it would be multiple programs throughout the city. And I think it would just showcase something that the city doesn't already have to offer. Like, I don't know the Black history of Beacon, and I think that this project would help shed some light on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, the reason we didn't do Howland Cultural Arts Center, we just granted them last year $50,000 for work on the building. Other grantees that we've given funding to have already implemented those projects. Mm-hmm. The Howland Cultural Center has not. And I don't think we should be granting a second grant when the first one hasn't been delivered on. And I have tried to send a strong message to the leadership that they need to focus on that grant, or they may lose it by the end of the year. I've tried to send them to other funding sources. We hear about everything everybody else is doing wrong around that center, but I don't see them fixing the outside of the building. Until they do that, I don't think they should get another grant.
It's my understanding with this one in particular that the Howland Cultural Center is like the fiscal sponsor for it, but Michelle Rivas, who is the adult programmer at the Howland Public Library, is really helping to lead and organize this, along with the Historical Society and artist Donna Mickelson.
Yeah, I would have been more open to it, but I haven't seen progress on the other grant, and I'm concerned about it.
Should we find out what we have consensus on, at least as far as programs?
I would, kind of what Justice touched on, before we get into programs, I think talk a little bit about what we as a city feel like the kinds of things we should be funding. I think this also be helpful for future years as we set up this program. For instance, sort of related to what Justice said, that I'm feeling like we as a city shouldn't get into the business of ongoing operational costs, not just this year, but in future years, that there could be specific things like the example of Common Ground coming for a piece of equipment, or the Green Teens as well, and or maybe startup costs, like things that we can fund 1 year, but not necessarily fund programs for more than 1 year in a row. But that's just my opinion, so I didn't know if others have other thoughts, because that's driving a lot of what I'm looking at. So I think knowing what you're looking at and why you want to fund them, I think is useful before we get into the dollar amounts.
The program is called the Community Investment Program, and what I wanted to do with this when we were talking about it was make investments, meaning things where we would put down some money up front and it would last for a while. Like the outcome would last for a while. So it could be like a vehicle, helping the football club with their physical space, whatever it may be. But I like the idea of getting something out of it for multiple years. That we put money down and this community benefits for a while. That said, I also really love the idea that the Foundation for Beacon Schools put out. So I don't know how you do an educational program fits into this, but.
Well, it does, because it's a group that ultimately is fundraising, and they're startups. So it kind of is going to have a return on investment because they are fundraisers. Yeah,
and I guess some of the stuff that we would be helping them get is the equipment, right, that they could do multiple years.
Every year.
Yeah. And when I saw the applicants, I thought before we even received the applicants that as much as I support organized sports and played it all throughout my youth and high school and college, I feel like I was looking for programs that were less traditional, less of the mainstream that would not normally be funded through a recreation department. So I was looking for something, and a lot of these do match that. So baseball, football, they have other sources, I believe, and I think with this limited amount of money, as much as we value those as part of the community, with a limited amount of money, I'd like to plant seeds into organizations that need that, minimal funding just to start.
Has NAMI Mid-Hudson done the programming that they're proposing in the city of Beacon before without our funding? Or is this the first time they're introducing it to us and asking us to sponsor it?
I believe some of their programs, like the programs in the schools, are ones that they have done before. But like the ongoing support group is something that they haven't necessarily invested in Beacon before, but have done elsewhere, obviously.
And I do know that they had specific things that they were going to offer if they were given that funding. I'm just pulling it up now.
Yeah, I think there were 3 different sort of branches or types of programs that they were
Yeah,
planning to offer.
I think they were going to add a family-to-family educational class, peer-to-peer educational class, and a program called Ending the Silence for Students, Families, and Staff. They have done presentations at Beacon High School in the past, so I'm guessing this is just an expansion.
Is this something that they've considered, or do you know if they have reached out to the school district to reach out for funding for?
I honestly don't know this level of detail. Again, we can go back if you want to make a list of questions.
Can we add this to the list of questions?
Huh?
Can we add this to the list of questions?
Can you say it again, please?
Yeah, do you know if NAMI has reached out to the school district for this funding in the past? Or if this is something that the school district would be willing to fund, or at least part of this, or the programs with the school?
So I don't think it's going to be an efficient use of our time to go through these questions, because we literally read the applications and we tried to come up with some scope of work that might make sense. I think a more thoughtful process would be to people to do their questions, email them to me, and then we can publish them for the next meeting, because it's going to take us some time.
I do wonder, and I think this is what you were suggesting previously, if we could agree on some criteria, like you mentioned or someone else mentioned. Usually with these sorts of programs, you have a scoring card or some set of criteria that's shared that we can all sort of agree on as a starting point. What I've heard so far from folks are, 1, what has the greatest impact to the most people? 2, prioritizing capacity building versus ongoing operational benefits. And 3, programs that would add something new or is filling a hole or some sort of lack in the fabric of our city's programming. Or uniqueness, perhaps, or meeting a need that we see.
And then I think the last one from Justice there is programs that can't be funded elsewhere.
Yeah. So if we can't fund it through this program, is there another way that it can be funded, or another way that we can support? Like, I was looking at the IM Beacon and some of the programs that they did and offered, and if we can't, I mean, it seems like they do a lot of work within the community, and one of the things that I noticed was a youth podcast program, and that's not something it seemed like they were asking funding for, but if we can't support them this way directly, maybe we can keep them in mind as we look at developing a new rec center in Beacon and creating a space for a youth podcast to continue and expand. So just thinking of ways that we can support these organizations even if we can't support them through this fund.
Hey folks, it's Lee. You know, there are lots of good things. You know, this is a limited program. We kind of have to figure out some criteria, and I appreciate the comments trying to move in the direction of criteria. And I know Paloma summarized a couple. I think the one that is just absolutely easy for us to all agree on, I think, is it's sort of investment. That's the item that Dan talked about, right? That we aren't doing operating programs. We aren't doing, you know, a substantial element of how this program works. I think we're just doing select investments to kind of, you know, juice up or get started or whatever. So I like that concept, because I think we'll be here all night otherwise trying to come up with stuff. Anyway, just my one thought. I think the other thing, though, what we'd say is I think Chris is trying to do this, is how do we quit talking about it and kind of move forward? So what's the next step here, right?
One thought is maybe you want to do a subcommittee that comes back with your own recommendations. Like the recommendations that Mark made were just because we knew this was going to happen. Like for $20,000, we're spending a lot of time. So any process that you want to invoke, like if you want to have a subcommittee go and review these and come back, you know kind of what everybody's looking for and come back with your own recommendations, we're fine with that. We're not wed to these.
Those criteria that you were laying out would make for an easy rubric to create. So we could have a group of 3 people that could just basically score each of these according to those topics that you were just, those characteristics that you were just outlining.
Yeah, I mean, there are only 10 applications, and we only named 3 criteria. Do we think we could all do a pass at scoring, and then maybe the committee of however many people can come back with a recommendation, and analyze it and come back with a recommendation? I just think it would be good to have input from everybody.
Yep, and what I would suggest, that sounds fine for this time. What I would suggest going forward, because this sounds a heck of a lot like traffic safety, where the topic is one that is very, very specific, and we could be here all day, and it's just not, I mean, just compared to the time we're going to be spending on planning on our Main Street, which is, I think, a big deal. So I think the other thing would be to think about whether the rec committee could be doing this on our behalf. Or could make a set of recommendations and then bring those recommendations to us, and we're, for the most part, just, you know, blessing them as opposed to starting over again.
Maybe what we do this time around, Lee,
we can't hear you, Dan. We can't hear you. You sure?
Really?
Yeah. Use
Maybe,
the mic.
Maybe what we do this year, Lee, we can give to the reconstituted rec committee to do in future years.
Yeah. But I like the idea of, look, if there's 10 of them, why don't you just, we sign up this time, everybody score them, agreeing what the criteria are, and then you can kind of drive on. But yeah, I think longer term, a process that doesn't burn a lot of council time, I think will be a better approach.
Yeah. Agreed, this is better done with a specialized committee.
And I'm happy to volunteer my time to be a part of that as well and to help hash some of this out.
Yeah, who wants to be on the committee?
Well, I think we just said that we would all just...
We're just all going to score it. Right? Okay, great.
But could you email around the things? It was.
Yeah. Do we all agree with those criteria? Just to re-summarize, 1, impact, the greatest impact to the most people, and I would recenter impact in improving the well-being and quality of life of the community, which is what the application said. 2, investment, prioritizing capacity building versus ongoing operations, and programs that are filling a hole and a need.
I think one more good thing to add to that would just be what has this organization done for the community already? Not like listing it, but like how much has the community, this organization given to the community already? I think that's an important factor to consider. Like,
track
is this
record?
Yes, exactly.
Wouldn't that be a barrier to new entrants who are bringing original ideas?
You've got a point there.
Yeah, and I gotta say, the programs that can't be funded elsewhere feels like an iffy criteria for me as well. I think that we should be funding our priorities.
I'm good with 2 criteria. In fact, I'm good with 1. I like the investment, which just says if it's not an investment, we just say no. That makes it easy. And then the real criteria is the one that's about the program itself, right? Which is it, Paloma, that was the one you said about, I'm sorry, I missed the wording, right? But the one that's in the application itself.
Oh, yes, improving well-being and quality of life.
So why don't we just say, here, score 1 to 10 on that one. If it's not an investment, sorry, this time we'll just say no. How about that? And we just use those 2. So 1 is a yes, no, and 1 is a 1 to 10. 10 being, call it the highest. Would that work?
I'd like to go with all of the, Lee, I'd like to use all of the criteria we laid out, please, instead of just 2.
The 3, but not the 5.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm just trying to get us to a conclusion. The only thing on investment, I think it's a yes, no, right?
Yeah.
Some of them they ask for both, so you might have to tease that out. But
Okay, all right, so maybe we have a way to do it. I'm good if we do the 3. You want to do the 3 and just do 1 to 10 on all 3 counts? How about that?
Okay.
Okay? 10 being highest, 1 being lowest.
Got it.
And then how do we determine how much money each recipient gets?
magic.
Well,
Maybe we,
committee.
This is why we made a recommendation. Now, you could all just go.
We agree with Mark.
I'd like to make a motion to accept Mark's recommendation.
We're not in a
So I'll
meeting,
do
we're in a
that.
workshop.
Sometimes the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
I recognize that, but I would like to go through this even further.
Yeah.
I do know we can talk for hours, and we won't tonight, but, yeah, I do think it would be good for all of us to go through all of them and go through those questions.
So if you can write up, please, in the language that you gave, because I don't have it all down. The criteria that you want, we'll make up a scoring sheet, because we already have this in a Excel file. So we'll put a column for scoring or a binary yes, no, if that's appropriate. And then we can also put a column that if you're wanting, maybe there's a prioritization too. So let us play with it. Maybe we'll do a prioritization, and then what would you fund this at? And we'll collect that information, and then some of you can meet as a subcommittee and hash it out, or
Yeah.
does that sound reasonable?
I'm down.
All right, who's going to be on that besides Justice?
Committee of 1.
No, you know what? I don't want to put my finger on the scale, Dan. This is all you.
Would it be appropriate to ask Mark to be a part of that conversation?
No, it wouldn't, because
Because we have to make the decision.
I'm trying to get the rec study done, and I'm trying to get the parks open, and I have a capital budget that I have to do. This is where these smaller items that take a ton of time, this is why I push back when you want to put them in the budget. Because I don't have time, we don't have the bandwidth as a staff to do this. We can do the support. We tried to put this together as much as we have time for. But Mark is trying to work with on that rec study, which I think is a bigger focus. We're spending $50,000 on a recreation study. Unless he stays on top of that, we may not get what we really need.
I'll be on the committee.
Awesome.
Anyone else?
I'm fine if it's just the two of you, if no one else wants to join. I mean, but I will complete the form that sounds like you're sending around. I'll participate in that way, but I don't feel like my addition to the dollar amount is useful.
Everybody can fill out the form, maybe to
Right.
feed information to you
Yeah.
both about the feelings of the council.
And then maybe what you're doing is instead of, the subcommittee is just aggregating the information so that we see what the highest scores were.
I'm making a dollar recommendation.
Sorry,
too.
I'm just not
Yeah.
signing up right now because I just have to stop signing up for things. I sign up for everything. That's all.
Yeah.
Why don't we just take the dollar amount that Mark recommends if it comes out the highest, right? So the number one, they asked for this, Mark haircut it by this, fine, take that number.
I agree.
Why do we keep making it harder?
Well, I mean, Mark,
You're basically all saying we have to start from scratch because you all need to, have your direct input from the word go, and it's like, really? I have a lot of faith in that process so far. I'm just trying to make it simple. Plus, I have dinner.
And we still have the option of just going with Mark's recommendation,
Of course. Yes.
which I lean toward.
I would as well. I think that he knows the inside, and he's probably got his, he's read every word of all of these and thought very carefully about your point about the sports. I take that point.
Mhm.
That was the only reason I didn't speak up about just going with Mark's recommendations, because
But I think he does have a sort of a more general sense of the needs of the
bird's eye
community, and I
view.
think- yep, sorry.
The bird's eye view. And also, I see it as moving in a direction of making this process more open and accessible, and they're building a committee, a rec committee that then goes in it. So it's like already moving in a good direction. So that's why I'm not volunteering for the committee, but I'm perfectly willing to score it if that's what this group decides to do.
Just to be clear, I don't think the rec committee is accepting we're not accepting applications for the rec committee right now.
Yet,
Right.
because of the study, right?
So I'm also good with just staying there. So there's at least three of us now. And if we make a change, we should start with that as our starting point and just make a motion of here's what comes out and here's what goes in. Because we just spent a lot of time on this, we still aren't very far. So I'm okay with Mark's. And I hadn't read it before the meeting, and I had no input into it.
Anyone want to make it a majority?
I would love to get the rubrics back from everybody and go through it that way. And I think that would also, I don't know if, it would be open to public comment, right? Or is this,
It's up to you.
not like a public hearing, but just like if we're continuing to talk about this just a little longer, people can comment next Monday on it and give thought that way too, as well. That way we have community members saying, I think it would be good to spend the money this way instead, just to keep that in mind. Not to drag this out longer and make more work for anyone else. Is everybody okay with the rubrics?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I'm fine, yeah.
Yep.
Great.
Sure.
So could we wrap this up for tonight?
I have sent the criteria.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll put together a sheet and distribute it.
Okay, is that it?
I have a couple things. I'm going to turn to Paloma to see if she wants to do a plug for next weekend.
Oh, sure. I'm glad that we extended the deadline for ideas for solutions to a aspect of community and public safety that may be lacking in the city. We're up to 11 ideas, which is great. If anyone still has any, please go to the city website, look for the community quarterly posting. Ideas are due by 4 p.m. tomorrow, either in person here at City Hall or via the online form. And on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. We will be across the street at Tompkins Hose to have all of those fine people share their ideas. And then about a week after that, we will be issuing a ballot where anybody, whether you've submitted an idea or not, can vote on your priorities. And then it's up to all of us sitting here to enact those in whatever way we can.
So the plug is, please come to the Community Quarterly on Saturday at 10 a.m. at Tompkins Hose.
And submit your ideas by 4 tomorrow if you
That's
haven't
right.
already.
And vote later. It's a three-parter. It's a complicated message. Somebody who can do marketing better than I can make that pitch better than me.
Can we submit ideas?
I think that we just are ideas. I think we're sitting ideas.
Speaking of actually the conversation we had about the community investment program kind of nicely leads into a suggestion I had. I know that as a council we had talked about wanting to talk about committees and the structure of committees and the viability of committees. What I wanted to do, and I'm happy to do it by myself or have anyone else join me, is actually, and with Chris and Lee's guidance, is to talk to the current people who run the committees and get some of their input. So what I was going to do is email all of you with some like baseline questions to ask them. I know we already got one report from one of them, and then take that information and use that as maybe a structure to have our conversation rather than just generally have it.
I love it.
We are so on the same page. I wrote Chris and Ben a week or so ago, and we have this on our agenda for
the 2nd, I think.
and I sent
And
them.
Ben it's either the 2nd or the 16th.
I think it's the 2nd. I don't know.
I think it might have changed.
Oh, it's a workshop?
Yeah, because
it's
we're
working things.
So Ben is preparing kind of an overview of the committees with the vacancies, and that he'll be presenting.
Okay.
And I had written out, here's a list of the people on each, the chairs of each committee. Are these the best folks to reach out to for updates? So I
Great.
think that's wonderful.
Well, then maybe, yeah. So I'll check in with everyone afterwards. We want to say, so we make the best use of our time kind of
Yes.
figuring out stuff.
Yes.
And the last quick thing is maybe a question for you, Chris, maybe you already have this, is I know when we approved the $25,000 with legal services that we talked about getting an update in like May, June time, and I didn't know if that was on your radar, or something that maybe could be shared with the council in terms of what they're seeing.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, great.
I might wait till like June, so that
I can't.
They got a
remember
late
what-
start. I don't think we even implemented that until.
Yeah, I'm
first
perfectly
week of
happy
March.
to defer to you and legal services about what is most efficient for us and the public to hear about how things are going. So
Okay.
I'm done.
And can I make a quick update on Main Street paving and milling? I just wanted to firstly thank our highway department, our water department, and the police department. They did an extraordinary job starting the project. Half of Main Street is now milled. We're going to make a run at doing the other half of it tomorrow, and then some of the cleanup work on Wednesday. So our hope is that sometime on Wednesday we'll be reopening Main Street. We did give ourselves the 5 days, but I don't think we're going to need that. We will begin paving next week on Monday, and that will go 3 days. And during that time, there will be no on-street parking 24 hours a day. This was a more limited parking prohibition. So the nice thing is this morning when we showed up, there were only 8 cars parked on Main Street, and we were able to find all 8 owners. So no one was towed. And we want to thank the folks along Main Street for cooperating and for being great during this inconvenience. We know it inconvenienced businesses and residents, and we're trying to keep that to a minimum. And I just want to thank everybody for their patience.
While we're talking about loading zones, if somebody is trying to deliver something, they should plan to pull off onto a side street, and they will not be allowed to stop on Main Street at any point.
We've been working to accommodate them.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing about this, Chris, I followed your instructions and went to the county website looking for the alternate loop route.
The loop bus actually operated on its normal route
Okay.
today.
And next week?
Next week, I'm waiting to hear.
I couldn't find.
Yeah, I'm not.
There was like multiple websites for the loop, but
Yeah.
none seemed to be informative. So.
But the loop operated all day at its, and
Okay.
we had one, for the most part, we had one lane of traffic open for all but a few times when we had a route around the next block.
Great. Awesome.
So, and you may also see half of the roof of this building has been done today. So if you see a mess in the back, it's a little bit of a mess in the back.
Pulled up from
Yeah,
the back and
yeah.
I couldn't get through.
So there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We don't have a executive session, do we?
We don't.
We didn't.
The person who was coming to executive session, we're trying to reschedule for 2 weeks from today.
Gotcha. And do we need a motion to close?
It wouldn't hurt.
Can I have
Just
a
to
motion?
have closure.
Is there a motion to
Motion.
close?
Second.
Okay.
Thank you,
very
Nick.
much.
It was actually today we were going to do